So, did I tell myself I was going to cool it on books in July and focus more on my writing? Yes. Did I do that? Of course not. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney, and on this channel we talk about books and writing. As always, in the description, I will have links to my newsletter where you can get more bookish content than you get here, and a link to my newest book, Finding His Mate, which is a spicy paranormal romance. Pretty soon you're going to get the sequel to that one, but I'm not ready to announce just yet. Today's my July wrap-up. Now, is this like an insane 15-book July wrap-up? No, it's not, because I'm not that kind of reader. I also wrote a lot in July and edited a lot in July, even though I tease myself that I didn't do enough of either. But it's way more books than I was planning to read. So here we go. In my July TBR, I talked about how I was doing a no-buy July, which I did fail at, but the books I bought, I saved for my August reading. I didn't read any of the books I ended up buying in July because I really wanted to focus in July on catching up with all like my backlist from book subscription boxes. And I did a very good job at that. So I'm proud of myself in that vein. So let's start with the books I had that I hadn't finished from Aardvark Books. The first one I read in July was The Magician's Daughter by H.G. Perry. And I really liked this book. I thought it was a very fun fantasy in a historical setting. If you're someone who's like really gotten seduced by the term cozy fantasy, which I feel like is everywhere now, and I feel like I've also seen a lot of people recommend books that I would not categorize as cozy fantasy in that genre. I've seen multiple people say that Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier is a cozy fantasy. It's not. It's a beautiful fantasy. There's on-page sexual assault. It's not a cozy fantasy. This is a really, good cozy fantasy. Now, there is some peril, but I think it's removed enough from the narrator that it still can go in that cozy fantasy slot. It's 1912, and our narrator is Biddy, and she lives on this magical island called Hy Brasil, I think is how you pronounce it, and it's off the coast of Ireland, and it's sort of like shrouded from the rest of the world. She lives there with her guardian, Rowan, and his familiar, who is sometimes human and sometimes a rabbit. That part was very cool. And everything's just going along until one night Rowan doesn't come back. And that sort of sparks this new world for Biddy in which she needs to go to London, to the sort of slums where she was born, and try to, I don't want to give too much of the plot away, do some espionage against a corrupt magical council. This book was really fun, and reading it felt kind of refreshing. I haven't read a fantasy without a romantic plotline in ages. I'm not saying that I'm like looking for more fantasy without romantic plotlines, because I do mostly like books that have some sort of romance in them, but I did really like reading this one. Also, this is a really good one if you're like not only an adult who wants to read something with no romance, but if you're looking for something for like a teen to read where you don't want there to be romance, I think, or they don't want to read romance, I think this is a good one. Next, I finally finished The New Life by Tom Crew. Not to say this book was like hard to read, but I did start it in April and then bought myself a ton of books for my birthday the first week of May, and wanted to read all those books I bought. And so I put this down for a really long time. But you know what? I picked it back up, and it was not hard to fall back into the story. Sometimes I feel like if you don't read a book for a couple months, you're like, what is going on? But I didn't feel like that at all reading this one. The best way to describe this book is it's like reading a Victorian classic that was written now. So like the language is very much like beautiful in the way you think of like a Victorian classics written. But it's a story about homosexuality at its core, and not just that, but like feeling like you don't have a place in society. The prose in this is beautiful, and the story is both beautiful and heartbreaking, but not like cry your face off heartbreaking, which I did appreciate. I had talked in previous videos about how I hadn't picked it back up again because I was worried that the ending was going to break my heart, and it didn't. And I actually think that Tom Crew ended this book really well, because I was like reading this like, how is he going to end this story without really breaking our hearts? And he did a really good job ending it. If you're someone who really likes Oscar Wilde, he's like a tertiary character. We never really meet him, but they talk a lot about him and his arrest. And it's a story of what it was like to be gay in Victorian England when it was against the law, and like how you're supposed to live with that. I really liked it. If you're a historical fiction reader, grab this one. Now let's move on to all my book of the month picks. The hard thing about book of the month is they like prompt you to review books you haven't reviewed yet. And I had a lot of Book of the Month backlist that I haven't finished yet. And so I really wanted to buckle down and read a bunch this month. The new books I picked in July were, I got Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid as a backlist pick, as an add-on, and then I got Dark Corners by Megan Golden as my Book of the Month pick. But we're going to start with The Last Word by Taylor Adams, which I had started and then put down. And I finally told myself I needed to finish this book. I really hate DNFing Book of the Month books. 1, because they are hardcovers. 2, because I like my account to be very neat and tidy with everything reviewed. So I did have to sort of force myself to read this. And what I ended up doing is there are 2 narrators, and one of the narrators is the victim and one is the perpetrator. And I really didn't like the perpetrator's narration, which is also written, I'm trying to show you an example. It's written like a typewriter, so it stands out compared to the rest of the book. So what I decided to do was skip his narration and only read hers. I would kind of like glaze over it, not even like skim it, like just glaze over it and only read hers, which made it a little bit more interesting. Also, someone very thankfully told me that her dog was going to be fine because I was very worried about her dog. Aren't we all always? I did not really like this book. I think it was okay. There were some tropey things towards the end and some twists that I really didn't care for. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny to give a negative review to a book that's about a author stalking a woman after she gives him a 1-star review on Amazon. So, but it wasn't for me. And for a little while, I thought I maybe was off thrillers, but you'll see in a second that I was not. It just, The Last Word wasn't for me. Next, I read Dark Corners by Megan Golden, which was my Book of the Month pick in July, and I really liked this. I read it on vacation, and I read it really fast because of that. I just kept, anytime I had a free moment, reading a bunch of chapters because I wasn't like doing dishes and laundry like normal. And I really enjoyed it. This one is about, it's got several different narrators. Our main narrator is Rachel Krull, who is a podcast host, like a true crime podcast host, and she is contacted by the FBI after a suspected serial killer who is about to go out on bail meets with an influencer and tells the influencer to find Rachel, and then the influencer goes missing. There's a lot of different stuff going on in this and I liked how it all came together. The coolest thing I thought was a lot of the book was about how no one is who you think they are online. The influencer, whose name is Madison, I believe. Yes. She goes missing, and the FBI is like, the most important thing when someone goes missing is talking to every single person they know. And no one knows her. Every single person has only ever hung out with her for like an hour or two, and they don't know anything about her past. They only know like the persona she puts on, which was really cool. I enjoyed this one a lot. If you like thrillers, if you are interested in reading something with a social media twist, give Dark Corners a try. And lastly, from Book of the Month, I read The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. I got this as an add-on in May, and it really wasn't for me. I gave it like 3 stars, like real middle of the road fantasy. It is, I don't know why I thought when I bought this, and I should have reread the blurb, but I did not think that this was a modern story. I thought this took place in like somewhere between the 15 and 1800s. I don't know why, but like in my brain, I was thinking that's when this took place. So color me surprised when I started reading it and it's a modern story, but it's like a modern fairy tale about this woman named Indigo. And it's about her now husband and her best friend from high school, basically. And they are the 2 narrators talking about her. Now, this is a weird thing to say about a short book because it's only 288 pages. I felt like this book should have been way shorter. And that's kind of something that like is a weird recommendation, seeing as that I don't think there's a huge market for books that are like 100 to 150 pages, other than in the romance, like the indie romance, which is a cool thing I think about the genre of romance, that people are able to write shorter pieces of fiction and they're able to sell. I say as someone whose newest book is only 150 pages. I would say that you could pretty much get rid of one of the narrators' entire part. and made it work, and it could have made it work a different way. That is to say, if you like very flowery prose and you want to read a modern fairy tale, that is what this is, 100%. It's like got the whole fairy tale vibe, like things aren't how they seem, fae creatures like to trade, like that kind of idea. Then I would say go for this. It doesn't really feel like contemporary fantasy, if that makes sense, even though it is set now. It definitely has like that fairy tale feel very strongly throughout the book. So that's The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. Yeah. Look at me. I got 2 Aardvark books and 3 Book of the Month books read this month. I was really proud of myself. So now let's go on to the books I read that were not from book subscription boxes. All right. So I read Lost Lake by Sarah Addison Allen, and I really loved this book. Sarah Addison Allen is quickly becoming one of my favorite magical realism authors, and this book was no exception. If you read the afterword, this is not a spoiler, someone said what was her inspiration for this book, and she says Spanish moss. And what an interesting thing to be inspired to write an entire book about, but also that felt very perfect. This book definitely just feels like Spanish moss, which is such a weird thing to say, but it feels like hot, sticky, humid summer in Georgia, which is where it takes place. We have 2 main narrators. There's a lot of narrators, but the 2 main people are Abby, a woman who has lost her husband. She's elderly, and they've run kind of like a quiet resort by a lake in Georgia. They don't have any children. And then our other main narrator is Kate, who is her grand niece, and she has recently lost her husband, but she is young, and she has a young daughter. And she kind of wakes up after a year of a grief stupor and decides she needs to get her daughter out of the town they live in, and they go to Lost Lake to see Abby, which is somewhere she hasn't been since she was 12. And now, if you've ever read a Sarah Addison Allen book, she just weaves such cool magic into her settings, her characters, and when they get to Lost Lake, it's not just Abby who they're seeing, but all the people who have sort of gravitated to this magical place. And then we follow them for a couple of weeks. And this story was beautiful. And I'm not getting a lot into the plot. There's like someone who wants to buy Lost Lake, who wants to turn it into more of like a water parky type resort. There's people who've been coming there for years who don't want Abby to sell. There's a woman that Abby met in France decades ago. I'm not sure how many, but like 4-ish decades ago, maybe 3. And she doesn't speak, and she's followed around by a ghost of a boy whose heart she broke. There's a lot of cool magical realism stuff in here that I absolutely adored. And if you want something that's got all the summer vibes to read before fall hits, definitely read Lost Lake. After telling myself for literal months that I was going to read the Lindsay Sands Highlander series, I don't even know what this series is called, I started it. And you know what? It deserves all the praise it's been getting. So book 1 is An English Bride in Scotland. And this book is crazy, but like one of those historical crazy ones that you're along for the ride. It's a medieval romance, which I haven't read medieval romance in so long, and boy, did this get me back in the mood for it. We've got Annabelle. She's about to become a nun, but she's like kind of terrible at it. And her mom shows up and is like, you can't become a nun because your sister ran off with the stable boy, and she's supposed to marry Ross, who's the head of this Mackay clan, I think. Mackay? Yeah, Mackay clan. And so they take her. She marries this guy, and wow, she has a husband now. And it was there are so many concussions in this novel. All I kept thinking was, these people need CT scans and MRIs of their brain, and it was so fun. It was also way spicier than I was expecting. It's not like crazy spice, but like spicier than I was expecting, and I loved it. And I'm going to read the rest of this series, probably slowly because I'm not someone who binges series, but I will definitely read I think there's like 11 books in the series. I will read all 11 books in the next, year to 18 months because it was just so much fun. 5 stars. Lastly, I read Rescue in the Smokies by Becca Jameson. Here's the cover. I read it on my Kindle. I also read this on vacation, and I got this on that like Stuff Your Kindle Day that they have. That magical day. Zoe York does like a Stuff Your Kindle Day every season, I believe, where you can get a bunch of free books for your Kindle. And I grabbed this one, and I wasn't unhappy about it because it was really fun. I couldn't sleep the last night we were on vacation because we had 6 people in a room, which isn't great. And I was sharing a bed with a 5-year-old, which also isn't great. And I ended up staying up till like 1 in the morning and then waking up at like 5 and read this book till 1 in the morning and then finished it in the morning. And it was really fun. We've got Juliana, who is a experienced hiker. And then we have Serge, I never know how to pronounce that name, Serg, who is a werewolf living in the Smoky Mountains. And she goes missing, and she's a very experienced hiker, so people are worried about her, and there's a vampire on her trail, and Serge finds her and is like, oh, that's my mate. And it was so much fun, and I really liked the Smoky Mountains as a setting. I've been to the Smoky Mountains several times, so I really liked that. It was very fun, and I already bought and started book 2. So for Stuff Your Kindle, that's good, because the whole point is you get the first book in a series and see if you like it. And if you like it, you keep going. And that author gets to make some money. So I'm glad to be, throwing some money Becca Jameson's way. And I'm already halfway done with the second one, and I'm going to buy the third one. So it was really fun. So those are all the books I read in July. So 8 books, like not crazy, but like I did tell myself I was supposed to read under 6 books in July so I could finish some writing stuff, which I did not get done, but that is fine. It is fine. I really enjoyed the books I read. It was really fun. And if you are still here in the comments, please let me know what the best book you read in July was, or if any of these books sound like your cup of tea, or if you really don't like writing words in the comments, but you want to let me know that you made it this far in the video, you can throw me an emoji that makes you think of a lake, because I read a lot of these next to a lake. And as always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.